What's up, party people? This is Chad joining you from the Puzzle Factory here in Patagonia. Thank you for joining us. Last we spoke, Rose and I were just concluding our trip down the Carretera Austral, arriving here in Puerto Natales. Now, our arrival not only marked the end of our journey, but it marked the end of a journey I had started 6 months prior solo on my trusty Africa twin from Los Angeles, California. Now, we're going to try to pack a lot of information in this episode. We're going to take you from our arrival here, which was May 1st of 2019, all the way to the mandated closure of the restaurant in late March of 2020 due to the pandemic. So when Rose and I arrived in Puerto Natales, we wasted no time diving right into the business. The high season had just ended, so it gave us the perfect opportunity just to kind of sit back and observe. In fact, for the first couple of weeks, we didn't say much. We just tried to fade into the background and get people used to our presence so we could observe things business as usual. Those first weeks, a few things became immediately apparent. One, Baguales had changed a lot. What had originally started as a very lively sports bar had kind of morphed into this sit-down family restaurant. Two, a lot of the investments that we had been making over the years really amounted to nothing more than window dressing. We had spent a lot of money to do things like add a second floor, yet the facilities and the equipment themselves were suffering from years of deferred maintenance and neglect. The brewery, the kitchen, even the salon here in the restaurant. To give you an example, apparently a year prior to our arrival, a table full of patrons literally fell through the floor when it rotted away, landing in the subfloor crawl space below.
Apparently the subfloor wasn't the only thing that was rotten. Immediately when we arrived here, we had a lot of people who were really anxious to speak with us. Friends, former employees, current employees, and they all had a very similar story to tell, which begged investigation. After we had a chance to pull back the curtain and take a look at the administration and the finances, we realized we had a big mess on our hands. We called a meeting with the local partners and they agreed to relinquish managerial control of the company to me and Chad. And those first couple months were just us trying to unravel the mess. We hired a team from Santiago to perform a forensic audit of the accounts, and we focused on trying to fix what was broken here at Baguales. Not just the equipment and the facilities, but also the administration. We discovered that a lot of one-sided business decisions had taken place without the consultation or the approval of Chad. I tried to put together sales forecasts and I tried to analyze the sales as best I could, but I couldn't even get the most basic reports or stats. So I found it very odd. This was such a stark contrast to the great trip we had just had on the Carretera Austral. This went from what was supposed to be Chad picking up on where he left off 15 years prior and was really our plan B, to us immediately hitting a brick wall. And though the financials could be analyzed behind closed doors, the same couldn't be done for all of the repairs that we had to do in the restaurant.
We closed the facilities in July, allowing us to make many long-needed repairs. We hired a crew to completely rebuild the subfloor structure of the salon, installed display refrigeration for packaged beer sales, new televisions to recapture that original sports bar feeling, and just generally gave the place a much needed facelift. We relaunched in August with an improved atmosphere and an improved menu.
Of everything we discovered that was broken about the business, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about what was right. and that was the beer. After 13 years, we still only had 4 beers to offer, but we have a talented brewery staff who had always wanted to brew different styles of beer. They just weren't allowed the opportunity. Under our management and with the combined enthusiasm of the brewery staff, we were finally able to start brewing West Coast style IPAs, wit beers, strong ales, and Russian imperial stouts. And once they were given the green light, they were like kids in a candy store. With all of the events that we would plan throughout the season, we tried to center those around our beer releases.
We held events with comedians, live music, national holiday parties, beer tasting classes, you name it. We promoted the hell out of this place to try to recapture some of that lightning in a bottle we had manifested 10 years prior. At that same time, Rose and I had to work on integrating ourselves to life in Patagonia during the winter. We spent almost all of our waking hours here at the restaurant, and when we did go home, it was just to sleep. Unfortunately, we lived outside of town and had no central heat. The only means by which we had to heat the house was by building wood fires. Getting home at 3 or 4 in the morning and going immediately to bed, that wasn't really feasible. So for those first few winter months, we had to rely solely on body heat to keep us warm at night. There are worse things.
Despite those initial challenges, there were nights when Chad and I would look at each other and look around at the party that was happening all around us, and we were just having a blast. His business model has always been based on the understanding that we're not in the business of selling food, and we're not in the business of selling drinks. We're selling the party, and this was the biggest party in town. We were generating a lot of energy and putting together all of these events during the winter months when Natalis is usually a very sleepy town. During the high season, it's always go, 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 and we don't even have the physical space to have something like a comedian or live music. After reopening in August, we had a couple of months to fine-tune everything before the October shoulder season.
As the high season approached here in Patagonia, a proposed fare hike in metro fees in Santiago kicked off the largest social unrest this country has experienced since the Pinochet era. Massive protests and civil unrest in Santiago spilled over into the rest of the country, resulting in curfews and deployment of military personnel throughout the country. Our neighbors in Punta Arenas were hit hardest with ongoing protests, structure fires, and massive property damage. Here in Natalis, we were much luckier as most of our protests were peaceful. However, tensions were high and this was a powder keg waiting to go off. As a result, we boarded up our windows. After protests devolved into structure fires and tire fires in the Plaza de Armas, the military mobilized, tear gassing the crowd. A lot of the protesters took shelter here at Baguales, resulting in the restaurant itself being tear gassed. We had a full house at the time and we were forced to evacuate the restaurant and hide everyone in the brewery. Shortly thereafter, a labor strike forced me to put on an apron and Rose to tend the bar when 90% of our staff refused to work. At that same time, due to my refusal to fire said staff, the woman who had been managing our restaurant for the last 7 years decided that, amidst the social unrest and our mounting legal problems, that this was the end of her time at Baguales.
Right out of the gate, we hit the brick wall. We get our legs back under us, then came the riots and the labor strikes. And Maritza quits. She had been the only one who, despite everything, had been able to keep this company afloat. I don't think there's any shame in telling you guys that this was a very depressing and all-consuming time for us. Everything that we had planned was turned on its ear. And I know it's easy to look at what people post on social and think that their lives are easy. But what I hope is the takeaway is that you understand the stress and the defeats. Everything that we hoped for was gone, and we didn't have any reserves. We faced this every day, and it was just very depleting, both emotionally and financially. I listened to what Chad filmed for this episode, and I could hear it in his voice. He sounded completely flat, and I'm sure you guys picked up on it too. I think it was difficult for him to recount all that went on in that year, and I know what it took out of him. I guess he's not great at mustering up any insincere enthusiasm. But he and I are way too stubborn to quit.
Despite what had been a slow start to the season due to all the social unrest in the country, as the holidays approached, we were packed once again, and the high season was in full swing. We continued to celebrate holidays and events from Halloween to Christmas, all the way up through New Year's, which marked the 10th anniversary of the opening of Bog Wallace, New Year's Eve back in 2009.
Yes, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Due to our perseverance and those months of hard work, not to mention the incredible work from our amazing staff here at Bog Wallace, the relaunch was a total success. However, these were hard-won victories. With the mounting legal issues with my partners, the continued social unrest here in the country, and our exhaustive work schedule of 8 to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 8 months solid, it all just finally started to take its toll.
So after New Year's, I went back to the States. I was losing sight of our goals, and I was mentally getting lost in all of the chaos. So I was hoping to regroup. We had adopted this stray kitten that we named Keanu, and she would work with me in the office during the day, and we would take her home with us at night. And Chad's not really a cat person, but when I was in the US, he was telling me of what a bad emotional state he was in, and he felt like Keanu was all he had. When the coronavirus hit, I was in Albuquerque, and other than the fact that my mom and dad's church had closed and people were walking around with masks, it was pretty much life as usual. Chad and I would video message with each other, and he was telling me that he was canceling events and there were these mandated curfews, but there were no official directives by the government. He was basically taking his cues on what to do here at Bog Wallace based on what was happening in Europe, things like sanitizing and removing bar seating. Then on March 20th, when the staff was here prepping to open, the military arrived with an official notice of closure. There was this instant panic. Chad has 30 employees that he feels responsible for, and he didn't have any answers. He was worried about how they were going to pay their bills, and he was also worried about how he was going to pay their salaries.
With Rose back in the States, I had my hands full smack dab in the middle of the high season, keeping this operation afloat. Right about the same time, we started hearing news of this virus coming out of China. Not there long after, Europe started getting pounded hard. This was especially concerning since this was the middle of high season here in Puerto Natales, and we here at Bog Wallace tend to be an epicenter for tourists and travelers. We did what we could initially to voluntarily implement procedures by reducing seating, removing the bar stools, as well as sanitizing everything we could with alcohol solution. It was a real roller coaster ride in the beginning. Rumors were running rampant about cruise ships full of infected people landing in Punta Arenas and traveling to Natales, as flights were canceled en masse, and companies like Navimag, who operated the ferry between Natales and mainland Chile, were canceling their scheduled trips. People started to panic. Baguales was flooded with overlanders and travelers who had no idea how they were going to make it home, and we ended up turning into this informal gathering spot and information center. Once Argentina closed their borders in March 15th, that's when we started to realize that we were really in trouble. Patagonia is completely separated from mainland Chile, the same way Alaska is from the lower 48 states. The only way for us to get to the mainland is by boat, by plane, or overland into Argentina. With flights canceled, ferries canceled, and the border closed, we were kind of stuck. Day after day, I would see the same faces of people who had supposedly left only to be turned around at the airport and return here to Natales after being told their flight was canceled. I actually ended up meeting a fellow traveler on a Pan American Overland Facebook group who had been traveling the world for the last 3 years in his camper. He did not want to be stuck in Punta Arenas for the quarantine and reached out on the group looking for options. I offered to allow him to park his camper here at Baguales in the driveway to wait things out. Now keep in mind, this was when everybody thought things were going to blow over in 2 to 4 weeks. Once Cameron finally made it up here and plugged into shore power, we had no idea that he would end up being our ad hoc security for the next 4 months. Every day we were faced with new procedures from the government, new hours of operation, new travel restrictions, and we did our best to try to keep up with things until eventually on March 20th, we finally got the mandate that all bars and all restaurants were to close. You guys still there? Whew. Hey guys, if you made it this far, thanks for toughing it out. That was a hard one for me to get through. That was a very emotional time, but we didn't want to end on a sour note. We wanted to give you a little bit of a palate cleanser, so I came back real quick just to talk motorcycles. So when I left Chile to pick Rose up in Los Angeles, I left the motorcycle in Santiago. As a lot of you overlanders are probably aware, when you enter a country with a vehicle, you are issued a TVIP, a temporary vehicle import permit, that is tied to your tourist visa. So if you're given 30 days as a tourist, you have 30 days on your moto, 90 days, etc. Well, when Rose and I returned to Chile, we got fresh stamps in our passport, but the clock was still ticking on my import permit. So by the time we got down to Puerto Natales, the permit had nearly expired on the motorcycle and the roads had started to ice over. I did attempt to make a quick run up to the border in Argentina, but by the time I got halfway there, I realized the roads were completely iced over and I didn't want to risk it. Instead, I turned around and I went down to the local aduana's office and I threw myself on their mercy. Luckily, they were very understanding, and after a few emails and some paperwork, I was able to get a 90-day extension, which got me through the hardest winter months. I think around September or so, I was finally able to jump over into Argentina and get a fresh stamp on the bike. One problem though, your TVIP for a foreign plated vehicle, now keep in mind we're in Chile and this bike is registered in California, is tied to a tourist visa. Well, Rose and I were in the process of getting our residency here in Chile, which meant that I was no longer allowed to have a foreign plated vehicle. That gave me one of three options. One, I could ship the bike back to the States. Two, I could sell it here to a local. Or three, since we are in Zona Franca down here in Magallanes, I could legally import the motorcycle. Obviously, I went for option three. Now, as we mentioned, I had my hands full here at Baguales, and while I could have attempted to go through the process myself, since Zona Franca and the aduana's office where all the paperwork needed to be processed is down in Punta Arenas, I chose to hire a broker instead. What they do is they impound the bike in Zona Franca and they run it through Interpol to make sure all the paperwork's legitimate and the bike's not stolen. Once that's complete, you can complete the paperwork and get a Chilean plate. The process was supposed to take between 15 and 30 days, but as things often do down here, it took a little bit longer, and my bike was impounded for 110 days before I was able to get it back. We finally did get it back though. I was finally able to swap out the California plate for a Chilean plate, and unfortunately by that time it was already February and the best riding weather was rapidly nearing an end, not to mention the fact that with the approaching pandemic, I once again had my hands full, so I didn't really get as much of an opportunity as I would have liked to enjoy my freshly imported motorcycle before the hardest winter in 25 years set in, but I did still manage to get in a few day trips. So we're gonna show you a few photos from those day trips. Like I said, thanks for toughing it out through this episode and hope to see you guys again soon. Ciao.
Action! Action!
You're making me crazy. He's back there, isn't he? Yeah. Oh God, I hate you.
Action! Brasil.